Hello and a huge big warm welcome to Friday. Jumping in with today's video, and it's really about children. Often children, our children, or children around us that we spend a lot of time with can be very reflective. They're often amazing mirrors for us, certainly as parents. I've certainly had that experience myself in what's actually really going on. And I was having this conversation actually with one of my daughters, and hey John, lovely to have you on here. And we were just talking, and she'd noticed somebody else in her life, how that the misbehavior that appeared to be presenting actually really wasn't the root cause of what was actually going on, and how she could see that this particular child was being impacted in so many different ways, and therefore presenting with a certain set of behaviors which were labeled as misbehavior. And it really endeared my heart as well to, hey Michelle, lovely to have you on here, darling, and Sandra, good morning, and Sal, lovely to have you on here too, sweetie. So of course, as always, please feel free to ask any particular questions. If you're having some challenges with your kids, or with, perhaps you've got some family friends or something like that, please feel free to jump in and ask any particular questions. Kids are very much sponges, and this was something that I saw again and again in my kinesiology clinic over the years, where a child would present with maybe ADD or ADHD, typical, personality or symptoms, and sometimes what was actually going on is that child was actually, their energy was very open. They were very empathic, and they were acting like sponges for all the stress in the household. Now, the last thing that I want to do is trigger any parent guilt here. So let's just take that off the table. Parenting guilt can be another reason why things don't function so well with our kids as well, is because often if we've tied up our own self-worth with our child's behavior, then it limits our capacity to actually really understand what's going on at a deeper level, because we're too busy blaming ourselves or shaming ourselves as parents, then needing to control the child so that our self-worth or self-value can still remain intact as parents. I certainly learnt that about myself quite a few years ago. My girls are now 18 and 19, so we're through a huge portion of that, obviously, parenting stage. And of course, I'll always be their mum, but I really feel like I've set them up for self-responsibility, self-reliance, and of course, always, being there to guide, and as Wayne Dyer would say, guide, then step aside. But it is a really big challenge, and I noticed as my progression in my own self-awareness grew over the years that things really started to shift and change in my relationship with my kids, and also how they were responding to conversations that we would have. And there was certainly a stage where it went from authoritarian parenting, where I just realized that trying to control my kids absolutely was no longer working, and they were bouncing back off that. We were resistant to each other, so in this phase of like locking heads and pushing, trying to get somebody to behave. And this was where I learnt so much about the law of alignment, and really aligning and seeking the best in somebody, or seeing the best in somebody, really appreciating all the things that they brought to the table, and encouraging and supporting. Now, I know that sounds like common sense, yet when we're tired, when we're exhausted, when we're frustrated, when we're depleted and empty as parents, then often that can present as stress, or we've all, and I could put my hand up a million times. I've done all the things, and I know that I would have parented very differently earlier on with my kids had I known even a quarter of the stuff that I actually know now. I yelled at my kid, I'd be like saying, oh my God, like, how dare you talk to me that way? Like, and here I am, like, reflecting that behavior back. So this is where, like, we've really got to, like, take a huge pill of humility here, and really sit back and go, how are my kids actually reflecting either my own behavior or how I'm actually feeling internally? And this was what I used to discover, like, in kinesiology clinics. So a child would come in, they'd be presenting with, like I said, ADD, ADHD, typical kind of things. And there was either kind of locked in traumas of, things that had happened. Now, trauma, let me define what I mean by trauma. Trauma is any time that something happens that causes us to question our lovability, our value, or our self-worth. So, and of course, I'm not diminishing any what typically society would deem as trauma, as, you know, childhood abuse or anything like that. So please know that I'm not making trite of that or light of that in any sense of the word. Yet we can all have fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of all those things, simply because from 0 to 7 in those first developmental stages, we're taking in that information, we're trying to make sense of the world, and often it can be confusing when we're inconsistent or when our parents have been inconsistent with boundaries, or with conversations. So one time, you know, they might ask you a question, you'll be like, yeah, no, that's fine. Another time they'll be like asking the same thing and we'll respond really differently, and then the child's really confused by that. And all it's coming back to a lot of the time is our own emotional state or our sense of overwhelm or how pushed or tired, how we feel. Hey Marguerite, lovely to have you on, honey. And all of those things can be really, really difficult as a parent to manage. And if our bucket is empty, it's like I lived in anger for so many years, like a lot of anger and resentment. And, you know, it's hard to kind of keep that contained. All of us have BS filters, right? Like, you know, if somebody's like, oh, you know, how you going? And you're like, I'm fine. Of course we know that person's not fine. And just the same, you know, our kids are so tied into our nervous system, particularly between that 0 to 7 age bracket. And everybody is actually in tune with everybody else's vagus nerve, which we all have a vagus nerve. And it is one of the largest nerves in the body. It runs literally from the occiput at the back of the head all the way through the stomach and the digestive system and extending out into our arms and legs. And that really signifies a state of fight, flight, like I've got to get out of here or this is not safe for me. And it is also through the subtle non-verbal communication that we're picking up constantly what's going on with somebody else's vagus nerve by the tempo, by the tone that they speak, by the way that they present, by their movement, by the jerkiness of their movement or the smooth and ease and grace of their movement. So all of these things, like children are taking all of that information in and suddenly being put in a hypervigilant state or going, oh my God, like what's going on? Like it's not safe here. All of these things. So often misbehavior is a cry for help. And I think as a society, hey Michelle, lovely to have you on, darling. And thank you so much, Marguerite. I appreciate that. Hey Jen, lovely to have you on too, darling. So with like when that's actually going on, a lot of the time with our children's misbehavior is it's actually a cry for help. And you know, I have amazing mentors that I kind of listen to all the time on different things, and they say, you know, if somebody was walking down the street and their leg was bleeding, like they were physically bleeding, or we could see a physical injury, we would stop and we would ask them what's going on, like, you know, how we can help them. And often when there's like misbehavior occurring, we're simply labeling it as bad behavior and then going into authoritarian control. Certainly that was and again, you know your child best. I'm not here to tell you how to parent or anything else. I've made trillions of mistakes. And I know from my own experience, for me personally, that when I went into that mode, all it did was create a deeper level of shame and feeling unworthy and things like that within my children, but also within myself as well. I know from my own personal experience, and I grew up in a super loving childhood, so like I just want to put that on the table, like we're all doing the best that we can as parents. And sometimes, you know, as a child, like we can interpret that information as we are bad. So like we interpret, you know, not just like the behavior is bad or the behavior is not suitable or, you know, correct for the situation. And I want to take away like the terms of good, bad, right, wrong, positive, negative, because all of that is just ego, survival mind, judgment. And when we apply judgment, we effectively lose the impact to influence anybody in that moment. So if you're judging your child for their behavior based on your own childhood wounds of what you got shamed for or blamed for or got in trouble for, we will project that unknowingly and unconsciously onto our child and make them bad, make them wrong. And often, getting sent to your room, like solitary confinement, that's what they use as the harshest form of penalty to people that have committed severe crimes. And so it sets up this form of feeling separation, which creates insecure attachment with kids. And so either they become rebellious, so not repulse, but aversion to your love or to your affection. They don't want anything to do with you, or they become super clingy and needy. So there's like the runner or the clinger, and it creates like a lot of instability within our emotional development. And often, like I know for me, I felt like I had to go back and reparent like my 3-year-old self, my 5-year-old self, that would often, as an adult, as a 43-year-old woman, and years before that, would kind of hijack my system, and next minute I'd be reacting and kind of throwing like a 3-year-old tanny, but feeling unable to kind of control it at the time, because I didn't actually understand what was going on, and that it was a wound that had I'd interpreted an event or a situation or a circumstance in my life incorrectly, and then felt a sense of shame or felt a sense of unworthiness around it. So I was in defense mode with whoever I felt was eliciting the same wound from me. And often as adults, we can spend a lot of time actually thinking that it's a new situation, but it's actually a past event from our childhood. And so how do we work with our kids around this? Number one is not to overly validate them. This was something that, now that might sound wrong, like you're like, no, I want my child to feel loved and to feel safe and to feel secure. Absolutely. I'm not saying not to do that, because that's essential to having a secure attachment. Being able to parent in a way that's effective and to be able to have a conversation with your child, or, if they're in such an emotional reaction that they're unable to logically have that conversation, or perhaps they're too young, coming back and reassuring that child, not withdrawing our love when somebody is angry at us or yelling at us or somebody's stressed. We've withdrawn our love from that child, and that's what creates that insecure feeling with our children. And also you may have experienced that within yourself, where perhaps you get triggered or feel like you've constantly got to be the people pleaser with other people around you in your life, because otherwise you feel like, oh my God, that love's going to be taken away from me, and that's going to terrify my 2, 3, 5, 7-year-old self. And often, all of this is happening very, very unconsciously as well. So it's really, really important to do the inner work on yourself, to B, recognize when your child is having a moment of perhaps what we may label it as misbehavior, to really understand at a deeper level what is actually going on for that child. I have an incredibly, incredibly sensitive nervous system. So it's kind of like, and I was reading like a book, and it's like, you need to treat your nervous system like it's a 6-month-old baby. So like a 6-month-old baby, like if it gets taken out all day, if it doesn't get nap time, if it doesn't get fed at the right times, if it gets overwhelmed by too many people picking it up and holding it and passing it around and all of that, not that obviously I get picked up and passed around, but like our nervous systems can be very, very sensitive. And again, like this is all an individual thing, and only you know whether that's, resonates with you or not. But for me, just being out and about, it can be quite exhausting to my nervous system. Because of the sensitivity, I have a lot of information that's coming in, therefore getting filtered and experienced viscerally in my body. So when we can really understand that at a deeper level, then we can put those steps in place to really help our children to flourish. And a lot of the kids that I've worked with over the years, particularly in the kinesiology space, were very empathic, were like those sponges like I was talking about. And so they're feeling things and expressing things on a really subtle level, where they're picking up perhaps tension or stress within the family environment, if there's financial stress or parental relationship stress, like all of those things. And often if that's being repressed by the adults around them, it will get filtered through the child's system. And so that's really, really overwhelming. And I know for me, like it was 23, I was like 23 before I actually realized that a lot of the feelings that I was experiencing actually weren't even mine. Now that kind of like makes you feel a little crazy. So now that I know that, I can check in with myself and say, hey, is this like mine, or is this somebody else's that I'm actually feeling? And I can get very clear on that. But as a child, it can be ultimately very, very confusing. And that child, if their nervous system is very, very overwhelmed, will act out in a protection mechanism in trying to keep themselves safe, or just literally expressing the unexpressed emotion from the adults around them. Another thing that I found particularly helpful with my girls that growing up was certainly working on my own self-love. And this, I kind of touched on a little bit earlier. But if we are lacking in our own sense of love, we will fail to put the boundaries in or to have the true and proper conversations that we need to with our child, for fear of losing their approval or for fear of them getting angry at us, which may trigger our own stuff with our own parents, or loss of love or things like that. The more stability that you have around your own self-love and your own self-worth, and you're not dependent on your child acting a particular way or your child speaking to you in a particular way, then you can get your own stuff out of the way and actually have a really great conversation with your kids. I remember years ago, one of my girls came in, she'd had a really tough day at school. I'd had a bad day of beating my own self up, my own self-esteem. And she walked in and she kind of grunted at me, and I was just like, I do all this stuff for her. Why is she speaking to me? I was doing that all internally. And it was reflecting out through my tonality in how I was speaking to her. And she got really upset with me and started yelling at me. You don't love me, or you don't care about me. So I went and I did the Byron Katie work, and this is where, doing our own inner work, and it's like, she shouldn't speak to me that way. And then I always do the turnaround. I shouldn't speak to her that way. I shouldn't speak to me that way. It was like, oh my God, yeah, there's the mirror. And that's where we can get so much gold coming in from working at a deep level to heal our own wounds, so that we're much more stable emotionally. And then I was able to go back and have a conversation with her and just say, hey babe, I'm really sorry. I have my own stuff going on. What's happening for you? And she was like, oh my God, I've had the worst day at school. This happened and some kids picked on me, or some girls said this, and it's just been really tough. And it was just like, thank God I went and did that work on myself, so I could come back and be truly, truly present with her. Otherwise, we would have just gone into a screaming match. I would have sent her to a room. She would have been feeling isolated, disconnected from me, unheard, misunderstood, all of those things, which just makes a child shut off more and more and more. And one of the things that my mum always used to say to me, certainly when I became a parent, I was very young when I first became a parent. I was married at 21, had my first baby at 22 and a half, maybe 23, around there somewhere. Had 2 babies and a cafe 7 day a week by 25. Things were really, really, really busy. I was still quite immature in my own emotional outlook. I would take things very, very personally. I was very hypersensitive to, anyone's form of criticism and everything else. And that played out through my parenting style as well. So that's what I'm saying, I would parent very, very differently to how I actually parent now, and actually really taking in what is actually going on for your child. But we cannot do that if our own parenting stuff is in the way, our own parenting shame, our own lack of self-love, our own stress, our own fears around what's actually happening for them. And I had an experience later on with one of my girls deciding what she was going to do, and she didn't know, and she was feeling a bit lost. And I could feel this sense of feeling out of control internally with myself. And so I was really trying to, I could feel when I was communicating with her that I was trying to control her. I was trying to get her to make a decision. And then I sat back again, did the reflection work, and it's just wow, Sal, you weren't, you were 32 before you figured out what you wanted to do with your life. So, I kind of bumbled around in all these different things, but it worked out so well. There's always the divine path. When I reflect back on that, I know exactly why I went into all those different roles, why, I had all of those different experiences, because I was creating, so many different valuable experiences that helped me to become who I am today. And when I freed myself from needing her to make a decision so I could feel okay, then I could just be truly present with her. And it wasn't long, she actually got a job offer out of the blue. So, things can shift and change really, really quickly when we're fully present with our child and the experience, and really understanding at a deeper level. Another thing that can really impact kids is food sensitivities, or just even things like hypoglycemia, or like for my youngest daughter, she and please forgive me, Tals, for saying this on here. But it's a really good example of really understanding your child or what's going on and getting really curious as opposed to getting really cranky at them for their behavior. And she'll openly admit this, she gets hangry. Like if her blood sugar drops, like if she doesn't eat within a certain period of time. Now, she was diagnosed as a celiac at 7. But prior to that, I didn't understand what was actually going on. So, and not that hypoglycemia is related to celiac disease, but it was kind of one of the other things that was going on for her. And so when her blood sugar would drop, like she would kind of like get like angry and really irritated and wasn't able to regulate herself very well. And so like, you know, as a parent, I was just like, oh my God, like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you behaving so bad? Like, go to your room, like settle down, stop throwing this tantrum. And when I realized, oh my God, this kid's blood sugar's dropping, and I actually started to click into that. Her behavior changed rapidly. She came back to a calm place. She's one of the most cruisiest, easygoing kids. But it's like, it's so important to know our kids intimately, to really question, you know, what is going on, and to really understand, like, you know, if they do have a food sensitivity, sugar just wrecks kids' brains. Sugar wrecks everyone's brain and their immune system. Like, it is one of the most detrimental things that we can put into our kids' bodies and our own physical bodies, not to mention memory, how that impacts learning ability, like all of those things. So, you know, we've really got to step back and take a lot of responsibility for ourselves as parents in, you know, what's going on for our child and trying to like kind of play the detective, and of course doing that in a really loving and compassionate way for ourselves, when we're not beating ourselves up either for that particular behavior or for how our kids presenting, knowing that you know your child better than anybody, and you will get to the answers, you will find the solutions, and that you do have the skills. And when we come from that true place of self-love and stability within our own self, that is the best foundation that we can give to our child. And I did touch on validation earlier, and I just want to kind of extend into that as well. One of the biggest things that I've really had to learn as an adult was how to actually self-validate. I was so hooked into receiving validation and approval from everybody else around me. You know, I did quite well at school. You know, it's constantly getting, you know, validation and told like, oh, you know, or, you know, being the people pleaser, being the good girl. You know, I'd run around and like clean the house for my mum and do the bathroom and things like that, and would get all this praise for that. And so like I became super hungry for that. I was always looking for love outside of myself because I hadn't actually learned how to love myself. I was actually 32 before I actually learned how to love myself. And that came about through fairly shocking circumstances for myself at the time, but it was such a blessing as well. And we really need to learn the art, or one of the gifts that we can give to our kids is actually helping them to validate themselves, so they're not constantly doing things for your approval and getting that hardwired into their system. They're actually self-acknowledging and self-validating, hey, I did a really good job with that. And one of the things that I used to say to my girls, they'd bring their reports home. This was when I learned this about myself. And I'd be like, how do you feel about it? And they'd be like, oh no, I'm pretty happy with it. And it's like, awesome. That's really cool. I'm glad that you feel like really proud about yourself. So it was like I was reinforcing that for them, and I was saying, yeah, good job, but didn't go over the top with it, or didn't, you know, make it all about my thoughts about how they did. I would always flip it back to, how do you feel about that? They'd say, hey, I got this amount in a test, and be it like a so-called good or what would be perceived kind of like bad result, I'd just be like, how do you feel about that? That was the first thing that I would say, and they'd be like, oh no, I'm really proud of myself. Like, it was a really, really super hard test. You know, it was pretty much like the average of the class. Or yeah, I actually did a little bit better than the average in the class, or I studied, I did my best, and that was all that I could kind of do. It's like, great job. Whereas previously, if they told me, you know, that mark, you know, it might have been 60 out of 100 or something like that, and I would have been like, what? Like, what? Like, what's going on there? And again, it hooks people into, oh, I need to behave a certain way, otherwise I'm going to have love withdrawn from me. So by flipping that validation back onto them and saying, hey, how do you feel about that? Are you like, what do you love about that? How are you feeling about that? What could you do differently? You know, if they say, hey, yeah, I didn't study, I bummed out, yeah, I could have definitely done that differently. And again, they're self-regulating and coming up with their own solutions where they don't feel like we're on their case, or we're like, and when that actually happens, now they're learning a deeper degree of self-responsibility. And essentially, like, in terms of my parenting outcomes, was for them to know that they were lovable and that they loved themselves, and to have deep self-responsibility for everything that they're creating in their life through their actions, through their beliefs, through their feelings, and knowing full well that if anything's going on, that they have the power, they have the choice to change that for themselves. So that was my whole parenting outcome of how I wanted to parent, certainly when I became a much more conscious parent, and really understood a lot of those patterns that were playing out for myself as well. So I truly hope that that's been helpful. One of the, just before I go quickly, like I said before, when we're stressed, when we're burnt out, when we're exhausted, when we're tired, if our bucket is empty, guys, like, it is very, very difficult to show up and be the parent that we really want to be. And this is where, again, that stress can play out, like, through our child. That vagus nerve gets triggered. We're in fight, flight. Our child is now in fight, flight. And, you know, often as human beings, we can kind of ping off each other. So if something kind of negative is going on with somebody, you know, with the parent or the child, and this kind of pinging off occurs where, like, each person is reactive then with the other, and it can really unravel in a really not pleasant way, and not supportive way for the relationship in any way, shape or form. So by taking care of you, by overcoming burnout or any stresses that you actually have, is absolutely key and essential to being the parent that you really want to be. And of course, our own health habits, regardless of whether your child's picking those up at the time when they're younger or not. And again, you know, the older they get, the less kind of control. I don't like to use the word control, but you know, in terms of, hey, they can go buy their own food, or, you know, they're working, or they're in their own job, or they're hanging out with mates on the weekend. They're going to go get the ice cream, or they're going to go get the chips, and all of that stuff. I fully get that. And as teenagers, obviously, you know, being able to monitor and regulate for themselves again is super important as part of that boundary setting and as part of that learning self-responsibility. But at the end of the day, like, if you've really instigated great health habits, over 80% of kids as adults will actually go on to role model that same healthy behavior that you role modeled to them, regardless of whether they were actually acting on that as children or not. So that can be really, really important and essential. And I really feel, as parents, it is our job to go first. It's our job to provide that leadership in both our emotional and, you know, our emotional intelligence, our emotional stability, the sense of security that we have within ourself, the self-love, the self-responsibility. Our kids are learning through us very, you know, unconsciously and consciously every day through just watching us and watching our behavior. So if you are feeling burnout, if you're, you know, I know for me as a single parent, you know, monitoring and maintaining my health in a really sustainable way has certainly been a challenge at times, when, you know, you kind of wearing both hats and being the provider as well as, you know, the nurturer and the carer, and kind of bringing everything together and trying to make everything work. It can definitely be a huge big juggle. And if you are struggling emotionally, mentally or physically on any level, please reach out to me. I have a beautiful program, which is my Thrive program. It's an 8-week program. It's got 4 extra weeks to implement and integrate after you actually complete the program, where you're still fully supported within that, and it really helps to interlink all of those aspects: our physical body, our mental, our emotional, and our spiritual self as well. And it's a really powerful transformer for anybody that is feeling burnout, unable to overcome like negative thoughts, feeling extra judgmental about others, finding it difficult to find gratitude and appreciation for their day. All of those things are covered within the course. So it's an amazing course to dive into, and to really get that physical care, where we're doing functional testing to really take care of the physical body, to give you the nutrients and the vitamins and the things that your body absolutely essentially needs, through what's actually dictated through the testing results of when they come back. So it's all very scientific in how that rolls out as well. So good morning, Phil. Lovely to have you on here. So have an amazing day, guys. I truly hope that served you. And like I said, if you are going through any challenges as a parent, please feel free to jump on, have a conversation. If you're feeling burnout, exhausted, that is the greatest gift that we can give our kids, is showing up as a healthy, self-loving, self-responsible person. You know, being able to role model that for our kids is really such a great gift. So have a great day, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye for now.